This is TWiT.
Let's start, though, in the courtroom, which something that broke during the show last week. And so now we've had a week to chew it over. Apple and Qualcomm buried the hatchet the day after jury was impaneled. The trial had actually begun. Apple had made its opening statements, and then boom. And then very shortly thereafter, Intel said, "Oh, by the way, we're getting out of the 5G modem business." Coincidence?
Correlation? Causation?
Well, somebody asked a question on TWiT, which was reasonable, was when did Intel make that determination? After the Qualcomm settlement or before? And in other words, did it precipitate the Qualcomm settlement? Did Apple say, did Mr. Intel call Mr. Apple and say, yeah, this isn't going to work? And Mr.
Don't
Apple
you love
then
how
said,
Intel said in the thing, we could still make them if we wanted to.
but we don't want to.
Well, Qualcomm is the one you got to beat, and they are entrenched, and they have really, really great technology there. And Intel was always going to have an uphill battle, and that battle was going to be helped if Apple became a major buyer, and or if Qualcomm had a major defeat that allowed other lawsuits and antitrust suits they've got against them to become stronger and stronger. And once they saw the cards on the table, they decided that none of this looks very good. Let's get out while the getting's good. They have to have had some indication, either eyes in the courtroom or some back channel thing, that they knew this was not going to go well for Apple one way or another. I think Apple also, the fact that they folded in one day also indicates that they knew that either late in the game or earlier that this was not going to go their way.
The opening arguments were strange. Like they brought up Kentucky Fried Chicken and whether you get the potatoes and the chicken, of what your expectation is. And they were all sorts of really like folksy analogies that
so that's the lawyers. That's the lawyers. That's the Apple lawyers saying, "Oh God, this jury's not going to understand a word."
The KFC was the Qualcomm lawyers. Apple had I forget. Apple had an equally absurd analogy though. It was just on both sides. And my feeling in all of this is that they've known no one's really going to win this for a long time, and Qualcomm has to be careful too, because most regulators hate a monopoly. It's why Intel licenses to AMD. It's why Microsoft gave money to Apple. You never want to be alone in the market. You always want some level of competition or some level of a detachment that shows that you're being a good corporate citizen. And Apple wanted really, really low rates. Qualcomm did not want to give them those rates. They didn't want to threaten their business model. Apple wanted Intel as sort of a hedge against Qualcomm, but Apple ended up having to do so much of the engineering on their own that they might have not, I guess, had an Intel to begin with. And I think it just got to a point where Apple made a calculation. Enough decisions didn't go their way, but sort of the FTC looked like it might, but that was a ways out. And they really needed to get their phones in order to ship. And so Qualcomm gave them a couple points off, nowhere nearly as much as they wanted to, probably a couple more than Qualcomm wanted to, and they decided to get the deal done. And it saves every one of their executives having to go up on those stands and say things that nobody wants those executives to have
Tim
to say.
Cook would have had to testify. That's one reason Apple didn't probably want to go on. Although what's weird is everything that you just described was known long before the jury was impaneled. What was the sudden timing of this? Was it?
Probably
that's
the
why I think
negotiations.
Intel's saying, maybe the negotiations continued this whole time, or
it was all signed on April 1st was when the agreements are all ratified for, and it could have just been they didn't get everything buttoned up until
okay.
Day.
Okay, so in other words, almost 2 weeks before the trial began, they had an agreement.
So like I said, Intel could have had a back channel to know that this was in place. But also the Washington Post had a reporter in the room. And I don't think that the presentations of the first day have been unsealed yet. But again, they had a reporter in the room, and they have a really good piece showing what Apple's legal strategy was. The Qualcomm, they're trying to make the point that to the jury, again, maybe trying to be the folksy country lawyer. Well, I don't know much about no baseband chips. What I do know was that in an open marketplace, they're showing off that, hey, here's a huge pile of patents that we bought that are similar to Qualcomm's, but they even though it's a gajillion patents and they're costing about a fraction of what we were paying for Qualcomm's few patents, and is that fair? And the reporter said, well, was able to look at this and say, yeah, but Apple was strategically buying super cheap patents that have absolutely no relevance to Qualcomm to make that argument. Qualcomm got access to like internal discussions and internal presentations of Apple about their strategy. I'm going to quote, I had to highlight this one because the purpose of their product was spelled out clearly, quote, goal, reduce Apple's net royalty to Qualcomm. Apple said in the document it planned to accomplish this in several ways, including, quote, hurt Qualcomm financially, unquote, and, quote, put Qualcomm's licensing model at risk, unquote. So that's a
smoking gun.
Well, yeah, I mean.
Also, admissions internally, Apple's own admissions internally, that Qualcomm technology was superior, while in public they were saying, oh, it's inferior.
Yeah, I found it. Apple said that when you buy Coke, you shouldn't have to give 10% to Pepsi. That was their big analogy against and Qualcomm's was when you buy chicken, you should have to pay separately for the potatoes. You don't get the potatoes for free.
It seems to me that this is a damning indictment of the jury system when it comes to high-tech lawsuits. Like, if we have to dumb it down that far, we need better juries.